2,000 years ago, the southern part of the African continent was inhabited by hunter-gatherer peoples, the Khoi and the Bushmen. Slowly moving down from further north in Africa into these parts were several groups of farmers called the Bantu. To the people of other continents, Africa was unknown, until the first European seafarers rounded the Cape in the 16th century and were met by very assertive Khoi people. In 1652, Jan van Riebeeck arrived. Africa south of the equator changed forever. Van Riebeeck established a refreshment station on the ideal halfway mark between Europe and the rich eastern trade routes. The halfway station soon became a colony, and French and German settlers joined the Dutch at the Cape. The British, however, cottoned onto the Cape's strategic importance, and for many years the Cape Colony was tossed between the two colonial powers. The Freeburgers' disenchantment with the colonial powers caused them to trek further east, where they first encountered and later clashed with the Xhosa people. The 18th century saw one of the greatest social upheavals in the history of southern Africa, the reign of King Shaka, who conquered and assimilated many tribes to form the Zulu nation. With the arrivals of the 1820 British settlers, the Trekboers soon felt that once again their freedom was compromised by the colonial government. When the government freed the slaves in 1834, it was the last straw. Piet Retief and others loaded their wagons and started the great trek north. They repeatedly clashed with the African tribes they met along their way. Die Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek and the Republiek van de Oranje Vrystaat were established in the mid-1800s. In the late 1800s, diamonds were discovered in Kimberley and gold on the Witwatersrand. Britain wanted the riches now in the hands of the Boer Republics. It was time to hoist the Union Jack over the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. The Boers disagreed. On 11 October 1899, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State were at war with the British Empire. The Boers were devastated, in spite of a legendary and heroic effort. They suffered their greatest losses in British concentration camps, where 27,000 Afrikaner women and children died. Peace was signed in Vereniging on 31 May 1902. The Act of Union in 1910 brought the two Boer republics and the Cape and Natal colonies together under one flag. The years after Union saw both the formation of the Afrikaner Broederbond, initially a self-advancement organization, and the National Party. It also saw the formation of the first non-tribal national African political movement, the African National Congress. The two nationalisms started to square up to each other. The native question was dealt with in the Union's first parliament. One of its first steps was to deprive Africans of most of their land with the Land Act of 1913. Their tactics were essentially peaceful. Two delegations led by Saul Plaatje to Britain to appeal to the British Crown achieved nothing to turn the tide of events. The symbolic Great Trek of 1938 marked an upsurge of Afrikaner nationalism. In 1948, the National Party won the election, and for the first time the cabinet under the leadership of D.F. Malan was constituted entirely of Afrikaners. As the Western world recovered from World War II and the shock of Nazism, they also recovered from the racist philosophies so popular during the 20s and the 30s. Not the Afrikaners.
There was a time when the whole developed world was guilty.
When bright young Dutch immigrant Hendrik Verwoerd took over the leadership of the National Party, he turned apartheid into an ideology, interwoven with their strict Calvinist religion. His laws required all South Africans to be classified according to race and to live in racially segregated areas.
Sensitivity that was needed in order to understand the same motivations and concerns when they came from black people. Perhaps the worst of our past was that we never knew each other.
The 1950s saw widespread resistance against the carrying of passes, a document which severely restricted the movement of Africans in the country of their birth. Hundreds of thousands of people were jailed for not carrying a valid passbook. In 1952, the ANC launched a deliberate campaign of civil disobedience, the Defiance Campaign. The organization gained momentum as a mass movement. In 1955, it was the nucleus at the Congress of the People where the Freedom Charter was adopted. This historic document wanted freedom and democracy for all and declared that South Africa belonged to all its people, white and black.
The Charter opted for multiracialism as opposed to genuine non-racialism. It attempted to transform the struggle from one of national liberation to one of integration. The Africanists, faced with this change of policy, decided in 1959 to form the Pan-Africanist Congress.
Same year in which the Freedom Charter was adopted, the African population of the mixed suburb of Sophiatown was removed to meadowlands. In 1960, when the Union was celebrating its 50th anniversary, Verwoerd withdrew from the Commonwealth and declared South Africa a republic.
Wat ons gedoen het ons vir Suid-Afrika gedoen. En ons verdien daarvoor geen los nie, want daar was geen ander keuse.
Black resistance in South Africa during these years were partly inspired by the spread of Uhuru in the rest of colonial Africa. By the mid-60s, many African countries had cast off the colonialist yoke and became independent states. The PAC organized a massive protest against the pass laws on 21 March 1960. In Sharpeville, police killed 69 demonstrators. This event rocked the country and focused international attention on South Africa. It also marked the start of its isolation. The government responded to the outcry by declaring a state of emergency and passing legislation banning the ANC and the PAC. After much debate and agonizing, the ANC decided to change strategies to include limited armed action.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
The PAC formed POCO, and the ANC created Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation. Leadership went underground. But the National Party had these fledgling liberation armies outmanned and outgunned. Nelson Mandela was arrested on August 5, 1962. Not long after, the rest of the ANC leadership was arrested at Lily's Leaf Farm in Rivonia. All were sentenced to life imprisonment. The ANC and PAC leadership were now in exile or in jail. It would be another decade before the monolith of apartheid began to crack.
Op 31 Mei 1966 is die land opnuut geklee in 'n feesgewaad. Die herwonne vryheid is nou 5 jaar oud. 'n Vryheid wat nie sonder moeite verwerf is nie.
This land has indeed been acquired by blood and sweat and tears. All shall not be in vain. The spirit of tenacity of our forefathers is still ours. We are a virile nation. Our young men and women will be in the vanguard of any struggle for existence the future may bring. We have no fear. We love South Africa. This is our land of hope and glory. We shall not fail her or any of those who depend upon us. Be of good cheer. The will to win through is there. We could not do otherwise. We have no other country, no other home. Here we shall stay, whatever the cost.
The solution that we then came up with was separate development.
I have just announced in Parliament details of the granting of self-government to the Transkei. The Transkei is the first Bantu homeland which has approached the government of the Republic to aid it by means of this great step on the road to independence, for which in its final form it rightly feels it is not yet ready.
It is indeed an historic hour that we are experiencing, as within the hour the Republic of Transkei will be born. It is given to very few to be present at the birth of a new state.
The policy of separate development had clearly failed.
White South Africa went into deep shock when apartheid's greatest philosopher, Hendrik Verwoerd, was stabbed to death in Parliament in 1966. His successor, John Foster, successfully kept the lid on resistance with bannings, detentions and imprisonment.
That as far as the government of South Africa is concerned, as far as my colleague, the Minister of Police, is concerned, as far as the Commissioner of Police and the South African Police Force is concerned, the breakdown of law and order in South Africa will not be tolerated under any circumstances whatsoever.
But a new generation of leaders and activists began to emerge in the early 70s. They were also inspired by the success of Marxist Frelimo in Mozambique and the MPLA in Angola. The giant of this period was Stephen Bantu Biko, leader of the Black Consciousness movement.
Any changes which are to come can only come as a result of a program worked out by black people. And for black people to be able to work out a program, they need to defeat the one main element in politics which was working against them, and this was a psychological feeling of inferiority.
His murder in 1977 caused another international outcry and further isolated South Africa from the international community.
Time will arrive when South Africa will have further do your damnness if you so will.
Simmering black resentment exploded on June 16, 1976, when police opened fire on protesting school children in Soweto. The protests spread countrywide and lasted several months. Hundreds of young township men and women left the country to join the ANC in the neighboring states. It was a massive injection to the ANC.
The apparent involvement, in fact I should say definite involvement of international communism within the South African crucible, was a major inhibiting factor which determined Afrikaners' reactions to this conflict. This brought a religious dimension to the perception of the Afrikaner that he had about his battle in Southern Africa. This ideological dimension introduced an element of fanaticism to the Afrikaners' resistance against change.
Minister of Defence P.W. Botha became president in 1979 after B.J. Foster resigned. The South African Defence Force stepped into power with him. Botha initiated a period of reform which included the scrapping of many apartheid laws, including the Mixed Marriages Act, the Population Registration Act and influx control. His creation of a tricameral parliament which excluded black South Africans gave birth to the United Democratic Front in 1983. It was the most effective internal resistance ever. The townships soon became ungovernable. Successive states of emergency created an environment where secret units of the security forces flourished. Units like the shady Civil Cooperation Bureau and the police death squads at Vlakplaas were formed. P.W. Botha suffered a stroke in 1989. He was succeeded by Frederik Willem de Klerk. De Klerk was faced with this choice: more radical reform or more radical repression. He chose reform.
Tomorrow will bring us to the end of a long chapter. What I've announced today was started by my predecessor a number of years ago. Since the moment that Mr. Mandela met him at Tuinhuis, and since the moment that in that discussion Mr. Mandela clearly stated his commitment also to peaceful solutions, it has become a certainty that he would be released.
The process gathered its own momentum. After 3 years of negotiations, South Africa had its first real election, and on May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as president.
The time for the healing of the wounds has come. The moment to bridge the chasms that divide us has come. The time to build is upon us.